There we go. So nearly 1 o'clock. There we go. Bang. Welcome to another virtual Sydney Mining Club. As I always say, this is our third one. They are. It's nothing like the real thing. We so like getting together in that room down the road here. You find me in Sydney at our offices. We really are looking forward to getting back together. It now looks like we're going to be back together in the first event will be December. There's one catch we're working on, that the speaker will have to come from New South Wales, most likely. We've got a fair idea who that is. While I'm mentioning upcoming events, in a fortnight from now, our next one of these, we have another great mining leader, and that is Mark Kutafani, Wollongong boy, and great supporter of the Sydney Mining Club, and we have him. He's now been managing director of Anglo American for, I think it's like something approaching 10 years or thereabouts, and he's done great things with that company, which is the 5th largest mining company in the world. So we will also be, our next virtual connection will be Mark Kutafani. Because Mark Kutafani is such a great man, we were unable to get him up at the terribly early hour that we've got Paul out of bed, which is, I won't mention what time it is in Sarajevo, but Paul's rubbing the sleep out of his eyes, but he looks very bright to me. From here, he'll be heading out straight to. He's not going back to bed. He tells me he's going straight out to site to check up on progress out there. So really fun to be linking up with the other side of the world for this presentation. And it's one thing we can't do when we do them live, is we can't. We have to wait for people to travel to us. So. Look, on behalf of our patron, Trevor Sykes, and myself, welcome to another great Sydney Mining Club. And we'd a little bit about, firstly, you might have seen the survey that I put online for you yesterday. I did get some commentary about that. If anybody has any interest in what the political position of the Sydney Mining Club is, it's quite simple. We're pro-freedom, we're pro-enterprise, and we're pro-mining industry. So, end of story. We've made our name on that simple formula. And if anybody was offended by that suggestion, we're just going to stick to our guns, and we just regard ourselves as being pro-industry and let everyone else solve their problems. And I'm sure Mr. Morrison's going to have a fun time over in Glasgow. So Paul, as you've read in the flyer, has done extraordinary things. Eastern Europe's an interesting one. When we were looking around, as one of the great things that Australian entrepreneurs do, and Paul is, even though he's a resident in the UK, he's a son of a farmer from Blackhall, of all places, and so a Queensland boy. But one of the great things that happens in any developing nation is that they get an Australian mining entrepreneur, and I think of Laos and DRC and many other places where Australian entrepreneurs have gone and ended up making massive contributions to the earnings of those nations. And by the look of it, Adriatic Metals is definitely going to do exactly that for Bosnia. But it's interesting because Eastern Europe, of course, is part of what we would call the traditional envelope of Western civilization. But it's had quite a different history, and it's a strong industrial history. But it's really it's now reopening in many ways, and there are brownfield opportunities for Australian exploration. And that's one of the stories here is, of course, the Australian technology, and even the consulting firm that did a lot of the human interface stuff with the community was Australian. And it's really interesting to see how an Australian approach succeeds, and in this case succeeding in Western Europe. So Paul, I think I think I've introduced well enough, and look forward to hearing what you're going to bring us. And I'm about to do the thing. So if you bring up your camera on the other side of the world, I will close mine, and I'll be right here if you want to talk to me or I don't think the great thing is that we don't get interjectors on this thing, but we've got a very vocal Sydney Mining Club membership. But there I go. You are now. And you need to unmute yourself.
There we go. So I hope you can see my screen there. Look, thanks very much, Julian, and it's an absolute pleasure to be invited to present in Sydney. I think, like everyone, I'd much rather be there in person. But unfortunately, we live in unusual times. But I see that things are starting to progress, which is great to see. Yeah, in sort of following on from some of your comments, Eastern Europe is still a little bit of a frontier. I've been living and working in Europe on and off since I finished university in Queensland back in '95. My first role, whilst I was based in Switzerland with Philip Morris, was actually out in Romania. And Romania back then reminds me a little bit of what Bosnia is like now. It's a rapidly changing economy, albeit Bosnia is a lot smaller. And we sort of were looking for a project about 5 years ago, and this was one of many opportunities that were presented to us. And when we came out here to look at it in December 2016, we were just astonished how articulate and intelligent the people were about geology and about mining. It really lived in the blood here. And when we went up to the small town of Vares, near where our project is based, the first thing you saw was a statue of a miner as you came into the town. The coat of arms for the town was a mining coat of arms. And clearly there was a strong history of mining here. And the visual historical industrialization was there. Vares as a town was actually founded in the late 1800s because the Austro-Hungarians discovered a large iron ore deposit there. And that iron ore deposit was mined for nearly 100 years. And as a result of that, there was all the infrastructure. There was power, there was rail, there was roads, there was water. Everything you need to start a mining operation. We went and looked at one of the historical deposits. We went to the old plant site, and if you can see my screen, you can see that old plant site there, which is now prepped and ready for rebuilding. We went to the old open pit where they had mined a couple of million tons of lead, zinc, and barite mineralization. We started trawling through bits of pieces of information. A lot of the information that we've used to put this company together, coincidentally, we found on the floor of what is currently our admin block. And it was covered with water damage, bird droppings. This is information that people just didn't realize. They took the filing cabinets and threw, the millions of dollars of drill hole logs, metallurgical test work, engineering drawings on the floor. And so when we acquired the project in March 2017, that was the first thing we did, was we gathered up all of that information. By that stage, we'd rented a very small office in Sarajevo, and we started digitizing all of that information. Logically, the first thing we wanted to do was put in some test holes. So we went to the old open pit area called Via Vacca, and we put in, 13 holes initially, reasonably shallow, typically down to 100, 120 meters. And we identified that there was indeed mineralization there. But what we were surprised by was that all of the historical assays that we had managed to get hold of did not have any assays for silver or gold, or very, very few. clearly, visually, you looked at the core, it was galena. You would expect that. And one of the questions I asked when I went to Sarajevo, and I sat down with an old professor who was the head of the Geologic Institute in Sarajevo, I said, well, Professor, why didn't you test these ores for precious metals or indeed copper? And he said, because back in the 1970s, if the state told us they wanted lead zinc, we went and found lead zinc, and anything else was surplus to our needs. And obviously, in the preservation of cash, they didn't drill particularly deep. They didn't do vast multi-element assays like we do now. And so we had to sort of start to build a picture. But what we were very surprised about was the silver grades. The silver grades are quite astonishing. And so we started to extrapolate what that silver content could be. And then we decided to do more confirmation drilling to come up with a more mathematical and robust and, most importantly, JORC compliant method for determining a resource. So it didn't take us very long to put a resource on the open pit. Did those initial 13 holes, assigned them spatially to make sure we captured as much of the historical data as we could. But what we were surprised about, whilst all that was going on, we were up on another area that the company had, another little small exploration license called Ripitsa. Now, Ripitsa is about 12 kilometres away from the open pit and the plant as the crow flies. About another 400 metres in elevation, so it's about 1,400 metres above sea level. When we were there in March and April, that was inaccessible. There was some old logging tracks. When that snow cleared, we went straight in. We cleared out a track. We smashed up some old structures at the Vares plant, took the concrete and used it as road base. And we went up there and we put in our first drill hole in August 2017. And that drill hole hit 64 metres at about 33% zinc. And I tell you, we were pretty pumped. We thought, right, we're really onto something here. So we gathered more historical information. We analysed everything. We said, right, where should we go next? And me being the completely untrained geologist decided where the next drill hole should go. And of course, it was a complete dud. And I got teased ruthlessly. But when you're sinking, 300, 400 metre holes, that burns through your capital pretty quickly. So we decided to take a more cautious approach. We started looking at the data and we put in another 7 holes. But all of those 7 holes hit high-grade thick mineralisation. But what we were really stunned by when those assays came back was the amount of copper, the amount of gold, and the amount of silver. And so originally, when we were looking at this thinking, well, this is a VMS style deposit, it didn't fit that model. We looked at it as a SEDEX deposit, didn't really fit that model either. We looked at it as carbonate replacement, didn't quite fit that model either, given the thicknesses. And so it was a bit confusing. And what I said to our team at the time was, we're going to have to list. We're going to have to raise money. We're going to have to keep doing, you have to keep pushing this and drill it out further. And so, logically, we're a British company. And we're a British company for a reason. In Bosnia, the British government is quite influential here. The British government's been supporting this country for a number of years and doing it very, very well and very, very fairly. That came with a little bit of government support. But we knew that London does not support junior mining companies. It doesn't like exploration. And so we decided to list on the Australian Stock Exchange. For me, obviously, that was a preferred market. I knew it well. But we couldn't get anyone really interested in the story. I think we got a pre-money valuation of 16.5 million Australian dollars when we listed. But we listed in May 2018, raised 10 million Aussie bucks, and got straight back in there and kept drilling. And since then, the company has gone from strength to strength. What we wanted to do was do things really quickly, but we also wanted to do things well. And one of the first things we did was we brought in a group out of London called Critical Resource. They're world-renowned experts in social license generation and preservation. And we set out an ESG pathway for how we were going to get that social license and work within this community. That plan worked really well. And as a result of that, we're now fully permitted. We're in construction. And I'll talk about this a bit later, but 2 weeks ago, we raised about $250 million in debt and equity to construct the project and bring it into first cash flow, which should occur in the first half of 2023. So just at a high level, what is Adriatic Metals? Well, Adriatic Metals currently has two projects, the Vares project in Bosnia, which I was just referring to, and the Raska project in southern Serbia. The Raska project we acquired in October last year. It's early stage exploration, and we've been drilling that very successfully over the past 12 months or so. The Vares project is our cornerstone project, however. It's exceptionally high grade. Has very, very robust economics. Current DFS economics are an NPV 8 of about 1.1 billion off upfront capex of 170 million, giving an internal rate of return of over 100%. It's got both base and precious metals exposure. So we have zinc, we have lead, we have copper, we have gold, we have silver. At the moment, we have a very, very strong cash position of $124 million in the bank. But probably most importantly is we just have not even scratched the surface of what we think is here. We have, as of late last year, basically received under a new exploration concession from the Bosnian government, the entire mapped mineral belt in this district. Now, it's not particularly large in terms of its land mass or in Australian terms, but you've got to understand that for the last 40 years, geologist after geologist from various Yugoslav countries and companies have been coming here and mapping this. And they've mapped it. They've done all the surface work for us. But they've never really drilled it. And they weren't able to drill it for economic reasons. So we have all of that data and we've mapped that out. And what we're now starting to do is test some of that information. We've taken some of it from the historical records where there were old adits, trenches, geophysics that have been completed. And we've accumulated a database of targets, which we're now systematically testing. And so the upside for exploration here is massive. I think from an ESG standpoint, and particularly from an ENS standpoint, we have been very, very successful. We have just yesterday released an international ESIA. It's taken us 2 years to prepare this document. And quite frankly, I think it'll be the most value-adding piece of work that we've done on the project to date, because it sets out a pathway. It sets out a pathway for how our company and our project can interact not only with our natural environment, but also our built-up environment and the community for which we operate. We've looked at everything from the way taxes are distributed in the country, how we can basically tailor the project to suit that community and the fiscal environment for which we operate. And so I'm extremely proud of that piece of work. And I think this is a document that's going to serve as a new benchmark. One of our biggest shareholders is the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. EBRD have extremely high environmental and social requirements for their investments. When we took their money late last year, we entered into what they called a project support agreement, which meant that we had to do things really, really, really well. And we've done it. And EBRD have now signed off on that ESIA. They've published it on their website. Their comments to us is it's one of the best ESIAs they've ever seen on a mining project. And this, of course, is one of Bosnia's largest investments, and they're very keen to show their support for that, as have the Bosnian government. So if we look at sort of where we've come from since that IPO at your obligatory ASX 20 cents in May 2018, the share price has performed very well. We've been very careful in the way we've raised capital through that time to make sure that obviously we don't dilute that denominator of issued capital. But we now are in a very strong position with a market cap of around 750 million Aussie dollars, a strong cash balance. And we've also signed a debt agreement for senior secured project finance and a small copper stream with Orion Resources out of London. And so that gives us all of the funding we now need to complete our construction, which is commenced in terms of site preparatory works. Long lead time items will be finalised before the end of this week, tomorrow, and we'll be in a position to commence commissioning of the project in Q4 next year, with production in Q1, Q2 of 2023. We now have a registry of some of the best institutional investors in the world. Board, management, founders still have a significant interest in the company. But we've sort of built Adriatic with the concept, I guess, and it comes from my background, being a banker and a commodity trader, of creating it not only as a great mining company that's got a strategic plan for growth, but also as a product that is actually investable to institutions. And in doing that, we've got extremely strong corporate governance, a board that is committed to a long-term strategy of growth in Europe. And that growth in Europe really comes from the fact that we see Europe as a couple of things. One is it's a very large economy. It's very industrial. But it is as susceptible to global supply chain disruption as anywhere else in the world. And I think the last couple of years, both geopolitically and because of the pandemic, we've seen the impacts of that. And we're seeing that now come through in inflation, whether it's energy, metals, ags, whatever products. Europe wants to shift its policy to start producing what it needs. And we are seeing huge investments in both Europe as a whole, but in particular in the Balkans, where we sit at the very top of the world famous Tethyan mineral belt. So Bosnia as a country, it's obviously had a checkered history. But I can tell you, I live here. I'm in Sarajevo right now. It is a fantastic place to operate. You've got everything you need. In our project, we've got rail, we've got road. Railway goes from site all the way to the port of Ploče. Bosnia National Railways is very, very keen to see more rolling stock on that. They're working with us on the provision of those services. We've got water directly to site. We've got town water that we're using. We can turn on the tap. It's the same water. But in our region, we've got a number of big mining companies. Zinjan, the emerging Chinese giant up in Serbia. Rio Tinto, building the Jadar project in Serbia. Dundee Precious Metals have been in this region for 15 plus years, paving the way on exploration, working with governments on reforming their mining codes. And as a result, the Balkans is becoming a premier mining jurisdiction. Bosnia has been a little bit slow to catch up. Some of the rules around the issuance of exploration concessions are time consuming and can be costly. But once you're through that, the process is relatively straightforward. And you get all the support from the Ministry of Mines and Energy that you need to be able to progress that. And it is a jurisdiction that is very, very welcoming to foreign investment. It has tax rates of 10%, corporate tax rates. Our royalty is less than 1% on an NSR basis. So these are places which are great for commencing mining operations, and particularly good for us where you've discovered a world-class high-grade resource. So 3 or 4 years ago, this was a site of old concrete structures, and some of them we've left there, we're going to reuse. But as you can see, we've started to now do the prep work for taking this and turning into a world-class modern processing plant. All of that work's being done by Ausenco out of Canada and Brisbane. We are about to enter into our final EPC terms with Ausenco to help us with the construction of the plant in particular, but also some of the infrastructure on the underground mine as well. In terms of location, that's a pretty beautiful view to have a mining operation. And the environment here, whilst it's got an industrial history, is something that we're really keen to preserve. We're keen to make sure that our impact on it is not just minimised or negligible, but actually we look at some of the historical issues and we help rectify those. And a lot of those have been identified through this ESIA that we've done over the last 2 years that we published yesterday. So in terms of what does the Vares silver project look like? Well, it's 800,000 tonnes a year underground, pretty small. We'll be hauling that ore from stockpile at Raputsa back through to the Vares processing plant, where it'll go through simple flotation. We're producing 2 products, zinc concentrate and a silver lead concentrate. Both of those products are destined for European smelters. And if you understand the European metals market, it won't take much to guess which 2 companies are really vying for it. These are low iron concentrates and they're in high demand. They're clean. We've got pretty much good preservation of grade through grade control right through the first 6 or 7 years of mining. And then we'll be relying on our exploration to increase that grade throughput in the latter years of the mine life. The payback period on the project is rapid. It's less than a year, but it generates in free cash flow quite a significant amount of money, particularly in its very, very early years. So in 2023, despite only being projected to have a 9-month operating period, it's going to produce around $220 million of free cash flow. And then that will increase through 2024 and stabilise roughly around $250 million a year for the first 6 or 7 years of the project. In terms of where does our revenue come from, it's a mixture. In those 2 concentrates, in the zinc concentrate, we also have gold and silver. We get paid for those. In our silver lead concentrate, we get paid for lead, silver, gold, copper. And so there is a sort of an implied hedge there in the mix between base and precious metals, which is roughly 50-50. The project itself, not particularly sensitive to CapEx. So a lot of the inflationary pressure that we've seen recently in things like steel and concrete aren't going to have a huge impact on us at all. What it is susceptible to is metal prices and recovery. We've done a lot of work on metallurgical recovery. We've been working on it since 2018. We're still working on it. We have got really good recoveries now, but we're getting better recoveries. And, you know, just to put it into context, one of the most recent test results, the test work we did, was where we had been sending our samples to the UK for metallurgical test work. We've been using Cornish tap water for those tests. And I'll probably never drink Cornish water again after this. When we sent over a couple of 100 litres of Bosnian tap water, we got a 2% lift in recoveries. Don't know why, but we'll take it. So we're going to continue to tweak our metallurgical recovery because we think we haven't quite extracted all of the value out of this yet, and metallurgy is the key thing. Obviously, metal prices are doing well at the moment. They're above where we did our feasibility study. And I think broadly the expectation is that they'll continue to increase a little bit more for some time. So where does that put us in terms of a global comparison of silver projects globally? Well, on a C1 cash cost basis, lowest decile. But on an all-in sustaining cost basis, because we don't have a lot of sustaining CapEx required on this project, you know, we are one of the lowest cost projects in the world. But more importantly, on a capital utilization basis or a capital efficiency basis, we far outstrip our peers in that, with capital efficiency of over 6. So this is a very robust project. It is a project that we know that we can add to through exploration, and we'll keep working on that. As I mentioned a bit earlier, we've just picked up this additional land package late last year. We're now starting to test that. We put out a drill hole a few weeks ago on an area to the northwest of the current Rupica ore body. That intercepted about 20 metres at about 20% zinc equivalent. But again, it was the same mineralisation, the same mineralising system that gave us that fantastic high-grade Rupica deposit. We are now drilling that. We've got holes in there. Those holes were sent to the lab last Thursday. We'll be putting that out, but generally, we like what we're seeing in terms of that area to Rupica Northwest. We've also just started drilling on a location called Orty, not far from the Vares processing plant. Again, we like what we're seeing there. And we think that this entire belt is extremely prospective. We've done a lot of mapping work on it in addition to what has been done historically. We've done a lot of soil sampling, we've done sediments, we've done geophysics across the entire area, including the first ever airborne geophysical survey that's been conducted in Bosnia. Bosnia is a reasonably bureaucratic kind of country, so getting permission to do certain things can take time. We've got to get landowner permission to go in there and drill. To fly airborne surveys, we've got to get all sorts of permissions, but we've done all that, and we've been able to work with the various departments within the Bosnian government very successfully, and being able to navigate what is a reasonably new and unfamiliar legal framework to us, but we've got there. But I think one of the reasons why we have this huge support is the way we have worked with the local community. We've had a public liaison committee established now for over 18 months, where every 2 months we sit down and we talk to representatives from the local community about what we're doing. On the ESIA, which we released yesterday, there's a whole array of different information sessions being presented by our staff in various formats in the local community and in the capital Sarajevo over the next month and a half. So people can truly understand what it is we're doing, how we're going to do it, how we're going to help fix some of the historical issues. But most importantly, how we're going to make sure that this project has a net benefit to everybody. And in that, we've looked at things like healthcare. We're about to sign a contract with a private medical group that's going to create a new medical clinic in the town and provide better services to both our staff, but also to the local community. The project investment is huge by Bosnian standards. It'll represent 32% of FDI next year. It becomes Bosnia's largest exporter almost overnight by virtue of the value of metals that we're sending down that railway to that port in Croatia. It'll increase GDP by 1%. We're paying all of our taxes. There's absolutely no transfer pricing. And why wouldn't you pay tax in Bosnia? It's only 10%. And we're starting to really grow our workforce. And we're trying to grow our workforce in this town. The Vares as a town was, 25,000 people back in 1990. Today, it's about 5,000. And we're encouraging our employees to move back into the town and let it go through that natural transformation. It's a beautiful place set in the mountains. It looks, like any other Swiss ski resort. And it needs to be regenerated. And a lot of the policies that we're putting in place are aimed for that regeneration. So we've gathered very strong and local and community and government support. But we're also committed to demonstrating how modern corporations can do things a bit differently. We've got high targets on workforce diversity. We've set a vision and values exercise to try and create an organisational culture around environmental protection, around around health and safety, around a commitment to the community that we believe everyone in the company has to adhere to. And that continues to evolve and will continue to set the way we want to do things here, both in Bosnia, but across Europe in the future, very differently. And I think the Adriatic brand now is becoming synonymous with a mining company that not just talks about sustainability, but actually implements it. And that in itself will open up other opportunities for us across this continent. One of the key things that we established this year was the Adriatic Foundation. It's a charity, but it's a charity designed to look at gaps in what the company will be paying in taxes and contributions to social security, etc., and look at what the funding gaps are that would come back through the federal government into that local community. So the foundation focuses on three things: education, environmental protection, and healthcare. And the foundation has been funded initially by myself, by other directors of the company. We have a commitment from our lender to provide a rebate of some of the interest we pay to them to the foundation. We have other companies and other suppliers that are keen to support the foundation. And we believe things like this differentiate who we are. They allow us to not replace government, but allow us to work with government, to work with other NGOs on resolving long-term structural issues within that community. We're very, very proud of it. I think I also mentioned that we have a project in southern Serbia called the Raska project. It's zinc, lead, silver as well. Again, a former operating mine that went through bankruptcy back in the 1990s when Yugoslavia was collapsing, when you no longer received the technical support or the financial support that it had been receiving from the Soviet Union. And we've come in there and again, we've looked at the historical data and we've started drilling. We've now drilled about 15,000 meters in total. We're building a good inventory of tons there. So we've been really focused on our Kizilbac project and our Savstachi project. Both of those are delivering. We've recently started drilling further south on our license at the Karadak veins. We're about to put our first hole into what we call the Rudnica porphyry. So there's a porphyry target to the south of the license. And we expect that in the next few weeks, we'll receive formally the Kazanovic license, which sits to the west of our existing licenses, where we believe there are a number of other porphyry targets. And we know, Serbia has some good grade copper gold porphyries, and that's what we're looking for there as well. So we've now got a great little team of about 20 people based in southern Serbia. We've given them all of the tools to be able to conduct exploration in a modern way, the funding to get on with it, and we're making great progress there as well. And as you can see there's some pretty good grades. This is shallow. It's very clean metallurgically. This will produce, again, two very good concentrates. And like the Vares project in Bosnia, it has a railway line that goes directly to a port in Montenegro. So how have we put all this together? Well, the first thing we did is we put together a great team on the board. Peter Bilby, some of you may know him. Peter was the chairman of IGO, or Independence, until recently. Has been on the board since IPO, as has Julian Barnes. Julian was the head of exploration for Dundee Precious Metals. And then we've added to that with Michael Rawlinson now as chairman of the company. Michael was ex-metals and mining at Barclays. And then we've added Sandra Bates, an Australian-British lawyer, working with us on primarily corporate finance and social responsibility. And Sanela Karic, who's a Bosnian lawyer by background, but is the head of corporate affairs for Bosnia's biggest diversified industrial group. And she's been instrumental in helping us understand how things work legally in the country, but also how do we build that social license? How do we understand culturally how our company should work and fit here? And between that team, it's been a great board, with the exception of myself as chief executive, totally independent. And we've now set up a corporate governance framework, which we believe is synonymous with the best companies on the London Stock Exchange. In terms of management, Graham Hill is our Chief Operating Officer. Graham, ex-Anglo-American, has built a number of mines both in Eastern Europe and Africa. Jeff Eyre is our CFO, sturdy set of hands. Dom Roberts, former British Army, has been in Bosnia since before the end of the war here in 95, who runs our corporate affairs group. Adnan Teletovic is one of our key people. Adnan, 18 years old when he fled Sarajevo. Arrived in Melbourne, didn't speak English, taught himself English in about 3 months, put himself through Melbourne University, got himself a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, then went on, did a master's, was hired by Ford into their prestigious PhD program, and came back to Bosnia in 2015, having worked at BHP, KCGM, and as our GM here. Jelena Alexic, Rio Tinto, GM in Serbia. Phil Fox, an exploration geologist who's been working in the Balkans for a long time, understands the types of deposits that we have at Ripitzer. And over the last 2 years since Phil joined us, he's systematically pulled that apart and given us a new geologic model to conduct our exploration on, and it's working. Vildana Mimatovic, again, a local from Sarajevo, understands the environmental framework in Bosnia very, very well, and has led our environmental charge. So we've put together a really great management team who are delivering for our shareholders. In terms of a project financing that we've just announced, just under $250 million of debt and equity, 120 million in senior secured debt, a 22.5 million copper stream, and we raised $102 million of equity. Almost half of that came from Orion, but we did a placing of $52 million out into various institutions globally. At the same time, we had Sandfire Resources as a major shareholder. Sandfire have been in the company since its IPO. They invested $2 million in May 2018, and we sold their circa 100 million Aussie dollars of shares as part of this placement. So, we've really opened up the registry to a strong amount of diversified institutions, and I think we've put it in a really strong place. So in terms of, a summary of who we are, very robust funding. We've got 2 great projects in 2 great jurisdictions. We maximise the operational synergies between the 2. They're driving distance between the 2 projects. We are developing a diversified portfolio of both development and exploration assets in the region. And I think in 2022, you'll probably see us expand into other jurisdictions in Europe. The economics of the projects are superb. Low capex, high returns, highly cash generative, and that puts us in a strong position to execute on that growth strategy through acquisition, or if we don't find those opportunities, to return capital to our shareholders. We've got a really strong registry: Orion, European Bank of Reconstruction Development, Fidelity, to name a few. We've done the hard yards on permitting. Everybody says, "Oh, Europe's hard to permit." Well, we did it, right? It's done. All of our final design work is now complete. We've got an 8-hour workshop today to work through construction scheduling, and we're going for it. All right, we will have this thing. We will go underground in December. We will start plant construction in January. We will start commissioning later in 2022, and we will be in production in Q1 or Q2 2023. And we've put together a great team of people. It's been difficult with people in COVID. A lot of the talent that we would have hired out of Australia has been inaccessible to us, and we've had to scour the world. We brought in a HR management and human development contract with a group out of Perth who are helping us build the capability that we need through a lot of these young kids that we want to hire and train. And so that's going really well. We've made a commitment to hire young Bosnians, to give them the experience, the skill set that they need to develop careers for themselves and ultimately expand this industry in this great country. And for that also, we get a lot of support from both the local community who want to see jobs for their kids and their grandkids. But we also get it from government, who are tired of seeing the best and brightest of this country move to abroad to work. They want to see opportunities for them here. And so all of these things that we're doing is putting together a great company. It's a great project in a great company, in a great jurisdiction. I'm obviously very committed to it. I live here, and I think it's got a very, very bright future. Thanks very much for listening.
Wow, well done. What an extraordinary achievement, Paul. I often think that it's like there's the management of an organisation like that, but there's also the architecture of it as well. And it seems that you've got the architecture particularly well thought through. And I have to say to the viewers and Sydney Mining Club members that Paul was significantly knocked around by 2 bouts of COVID himself. So there you go. Look at this guy. We actually could still hear the COVID cough, I think, couldn't we, Paul? Is that the end of it? No.
I'll have to be honest, Julian, I've become a bit localised. That's from smoking.
He's honest too. Look, while we've got a Q&A box down the corner there for members, anyone listening, to jump on and love to hear from you. While we're doing that, while you're thinking about some questions, and I've got a bunch myself, I'd just like to run through our sponsors and thank everybody. And because they make the world go round. The membership of the Sydney Mining Club is free, and it's thanks to all of these good people: AME Group, Bear Doll Bear Australia, Geo's Mining, New South Wales Minerals Council, New South Wales Mining, CRU, Sydney Stock Exchange, Australian Resources and Investment Magazine, APM Graphics, the ANZ Bank, Empire Energy, which is actually the logo on the door back behind me, Research as a Service, Finola Burke, AMEC, the Association of Mining and Exploration Companies, that represents generally the smaller mining companies, Hetherington Title Services, Deloitte, miningnews.net, and Veritas. So that's a great list. Thank you so much. And as I always say, please take your thanks and your business to all of those groups. And that's the best way you can thank them is in person, because they make the wheels go round here. I can see questions filling up there, keep them coming, but I've got one observation, which is that in the developed world, Paul, you were saying how it's kind of hard to be, people said it was hard to get title in Europe. Anyone tried Australia lately? Some of the jurisdictions, such as this one, New South Wales, make it bloody hard. And one of the problems nowadays emerging, which I think we don't have in Eastern Europe, is that in the bureaucracy, there's a lot of activists, people who actually disagree with what you're trying to get licensed, and they find every way possible to tie your shoelaces together under the table at every turn. But still, the great thing about Eastern Europe, and if you ever wanted to, I heard somebody else say, if you ever wanted to build the next BHP, you'd build it in Eastern Europe, for that reason that they're interested in the education of their children as a priority, and they're improving their quality of life. They remember inferior systems, and so even it might be a bit process bureaucratic, but at least you don't have the bureaucracy isn't the enemy as it is in many places in Australia. So, what a great path. I'm sure you'll have no trouble reaching mid-cap status. And what exciting geology. I was really, you must be, you're going to go out and see the drill rig today, or are you drilling, or what are you up to?
I don't think I'll get to the drill rig, but we are drilling. But I think, you do get environmental activism wherever you are in the world, and we'll see that continue to increase. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, Julian. I think, for companies like ourselves, when we're looking at projects, we've got to do that really well. We've got to look at, scientifically, every impact we're going to have. But we've really got to focus on how what we call as one of our key sort of values is, aligned to the aspirations of those communities with which we work.
Oh, yeah.
And that's something that we think is key in Europe. It is key in Australia. It will be more dominant in Africa, in North America, South America. Mining companies have got to do this stuff a bit better than we've done in the past. We are being led by some great companies, out there. And I think you mentioned Mark Cutifani is coming on in a couple of weeks' time. Anglo American are world leaders in this, but we're seeing many other mining companies, Australian and international, that are really setting a path here of reshaping the industry and reshaping the way it's perceived by the broader investment community.
Well, I think it's also, to some extent, a generational thing, in that before we used to go, particularly in a post-World War II world, we always went back to an authority at the top, that was a sort of nearly a militaristic relic structure. But, it makes far more sense to establish those, that, I don't like the term license to operate, but, that collaboration with the community yourself. I mean, it's the best relationships are one-to-one. And if you go to somebody else to ask for permission to have a relationship with someone else, you're always weakening your direct opportunity. And I think in New South Wales, actually, there's a great, the royalties, the position of the department here is that you should just go out and do the same thing yourself, but the royalties all go straight to Macquarie Street. So why not peel off 1% and give it to the local council, and a part of that directly to the 5 properties that are around there, and incentivise everyone to get everyone aligned, as it's really the key thing in what you're talking about. I have a question here from that says, I think, how do you pronounce this word? Licky Skier, wherever that Licky is coming from. Rupici next assay, approximate ETA, a drill still turning, thanks. So sounds like somebody's a shareholder there.
Yeah, look, we do. We've got 5 rigs up on Rupici at the moment. 2 of them are doing exploration. One's at Orty, which is further near Viavacha. And then I've got 2 just tidying up some geotechnical drilling that we need to do on the stockpile area at Rupici. They'll be finished in about 8-10 days. And then we've worked through with our exploration team this year, because we're doing so much, because, Rupici is on a hill that's 50 degrees. Because it's not a great place to work in winter. I think a couple of years ago, I had one drill rig, I waved it down the hill involuntarily. It's not a particularly safe place to work, but because we're doing so much pre-development work up there in terms of road construction and whatnot, it's becoming easier to work up there in winter. So we're going to drill right through this winter. We really like what we're seeing.
Great. And tell me, on the Genesis side, I mean, they used to say they're not VMS, but it's got all the signature there, particularly with high barium, barite, copper, lead, zinc, and barite. I mean, how is that not a VMS? And what do you think? What does everyone say about the Genesis? Oh, that was one part, and the other part was, is it the same Genesis up in Serbia? No, it's more porphyries, isn't it?
Well, look, the Serbian deposits are sedimentary hosted, and they are more SEDEX. What we are seeing in Bosnia is, I think, a sort of hybrid SEDEX and a carbonate replacement system. It's not VMS because there's no V. There's no volcanics at all. We haven't intercepted a single bit of volcanics anywhere. So what we see is there's obviously been multiple phases of fluid remobilisation that's brought in a latter stage the gold and copper. The question is, where did it come from? And that's what we're trying to find out. And that's why we've got really good structural geos helping us.
Well, typically there would be a big igneous system below sending the hydrothermal fluids up, I'd imagine, but that's something that you'll no doubt discover. I got Rupice pronounced properly now. The other one is, of course, how did you say it? Jadar lithium project of Rio. It's a category killer, isn't it?
Look, I mean, Yadar's a big project, no doubt about it. It'll transform the industry in this part of the world, and I think, you know, under the custodianship of Rio, again, you'll see local communities will see that these things can be done well, sympathetically to the environment and the community. But you know, there's a lot of potential for many minerals in the Balkans. Obviously, a number of companies looking for lithium. You've got Eurolithium up in Serbia as well. But you need, you know, the lithium market, I think, needs 5 Yadars. So, you know, keep looking. There's a huge amount of potential, and I think, you know, companies like ourselves, companies like Rio, are trying to set a standard for how we operate in these communities, and I think, you know, all in all, that's going pretty well.
Wow. Okay. Well, look, we are coming up on time now, and I mean, on behalf of all these 200 people behind me who aren't here today, no, I'm seriously impressed. It's a great, you know, great approach, great geology. It's exactly as somebody said before. If you were going to build the BHP today, Eastern Europe is where you would go, and it looks like, you know, we've got a pretty good. I mean, also once you're got this plant up, the exploration discoveries are all cream on top of that, aren't they?
Yeah.
And how deep? What's the deepest you've drilled so far?
Oh, look, I've drilled a hole to 1,000 meters. I didn't get a lot of mineralization in it, but I got a lot of information out of it. Most of the mineralization is sort of between 200 and 400 meters.
That must have been one of the holes that you sighted, was it, Paul?
Actually, I didn't that one, but I could have easily been. I'm not very good at targeting these things. No,
why would you? You know, you pay people to do everything else. But anyway, look, it's, you know, we get stories like this at Sydney Mining Club. This is our absolute engine room. And I think it's always inspiring to hear how enterprise, you know, particularly going to countries. We've had stories from Terra del Fuego, and you know, think of the Panos story in Laos, and you know, they really do transform these nations. And you can give them aid, but I always say, better than giving them aid, give them an Australian mining entrepreneur, and you're far better off, because that's an enduring benefit. But yeah, really appreciate you getting up so early, and I guess you'll be drinking more coffee today than you normally do. And,
probably.
Yeah. And
coffee and fags.
Right. And if you're feeling sleepy on the road, do pull over, because you know, like you know, got to keep you safe. Look, I think that's a really good point to wrap up. I think we've had, you know, it's great story. I love it to pieces. I think I'll go and buy some, actually. It ticks all my boxes. So really nice being with you, and make sure you come and see us when you're in Sydney, and we'll come and do a live show. I'd love to. Thanks, Julian. Thanks for inviting me. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.